Today we're going to talk about buying your first board. So there's a few key things that you're looking at when you're looking to buy your first board, all of which we talked about in the lecture on board theory. So the first thing you want to look at is the size of the board. Now this is the length and the width, the outline of the board if you like. Now what we're looking at here really, I would suggest look at a range between 130 centimetres and 140 centimetres. Now the exact size you're going to want is going to depend on your height and your weight. The taller, the heavier you are, you're going to want to go further up to the top end of that range. The smaller, the more petite you are, you're going to want to go towards the bottom end of that range. To give you an example, I'm about 6'3" and about 90 kg. I ride a 135 but would probably prefer to ride a 138 the next time I buy a twin tip. What does that mean? That's talking about the length in centimetres. So 135 is 135 centimetres long. But as I say, I would probably be better off on a 135. So that gives you some example of where you might fall on that chart. If you're a smaller girl, you'd probably go down near a 130, 131. For a bigger bloke, you might go up to 140, even 141 if you're pushing it at the top there. Okay. But again, if you can try a few different boards, test them, because the difference, as all us men know, and as all you women know of course, the difference between 1 centimetre is a lot. You will really feel the difference between a 135 and a 136. It might seem stupid, but if you actually think what you're doing by, let's say you've got a board that's 135 centimetres long and 32 centimetres wide, for sake of example. If you add 1 centimetre to the length, you're adding 32 centimetres to the volume, 32 square centimetres, because you're adding 1 centimetre a lot across the width, which is 32 centimetres. If you add 1 centimetre of width on that board, you're adding 135 square centimetres of volume, because you're adding 1 centimetre across 135 centimetres. So by increasing the width, you're actually increasing the surface area a huge amount more than by increasing the length. So increasingly manufacturers, it used to be that you'd only get one dimension, the board would be a 135 or a 142 or a 131. Now more and more manufacturers are giving you the length and the width, as they're realising that the width is equally, if not more important than the length. So what does this mean? Well, if you're a big guy, you can get away with a 135 board if it's a little bit wider than average. Okay, so again, the width is important as much as the length, but what we're talking about generally is surface area. The more surface area the board has, the better it's going to support us bigger guys, and the less surface area it has, the more controllable it's going to be for you smaller guys. Okay, so that's the general rule. A bigger board is more stable, but as a rule is more difficult to hold down power on. Why? Because the board's sitting higher up in the water, so it wants to bounce out more. So when it gets overpowered quickly. Whereas with a small board, the board sits low in the water and you can really drive it into the water. So you can be overpowered and still control the power. But it will sink at the first mispiling of the kite or the first lull in the wind. So that's what you're looking for with size-wise. Again, the best way to do this is to get out there and test it. As I said, there's a huge difference in 1 centimetre of length or in width, and you really will feel it. So don't just think, oh, I've got a 135 or 136 is no different. It might feel very different. So that's the first thing you're looking at, is the size of the board. That really is the most important. What sort of size do you want? As I said, something between a 130 and a 140 is going to be good, okay, for pretty much everyone. Built into that is the outline. I've already said the more square the board looks, again, the more stable, the more forgiving it is, but the less dynamic it's going to be. Now again, for a beginner, as we said, when we're looking at boards, the general rule is that the more boring a board looks, the more boring it rides. Well, boring isn't necessarily a bad thing for us. Why? Because all we want to do often is ride in a straight line easily. We're not too bothered about doing the fancy tricks, all these other bits. So a nice boring board actually could be exactly what we're looking for. So don't dismiss a board just because it's got that kind of door-like shape. There's also another advantage, which we'll talk about in a minute, as to why that might be a great thing to do to start with. So look at the outline, see where you want to go. And again, to start with, you're not really going to have an idea about this, so it's quite good if you can test a few different ones around about the size that you're looking at. The other thing, the rocker line, I've already said, the more aggressive the rocker line, the more aggressive the board's going to ride. The more rocker line, i.e. the more bow in the board, the easier the board will turn, the more it will want to turn, the less it will want to go in a straight line. Pads and straps, very, very important. The biggest thing here is that they are comfortable. They need to be combined. I bought a board once and the foot straps looked really awesome. I put it on and it was like riding with bear traps on my feet, and it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. Now, with this board, to be fair, over a few sessions the foot strap bedded in and became really comfortable. So it's not always something you can tell on the first ride, especially with the harder pads and straps. They tend to need a few sessions to mould to your feet, which is where the problem lies. You can't often tell just by testing one set of straps if it's going to be good for you. You need to buy it and then test it over a few sessions. So there's no real hack for that, I've found. But what you might find over time is that you prefer harder or softer pads and straps. So that's worth testing as well and just seeing the differences between them. But again, get out there, test as many as you can is the best example. But again, when we're talking about pads and straps, look at the thickness of the pads. To start with, you want fairly thick pads. Why? Because it gives you protection when you're landing or mislanding your first jumps. Thinner pads give you more feel for the board, but they're going to protect your knees, your ankles that much less if you fluff the landing. Okay, so you want fairly thick pads. Straps need to fit. What I normally use as a rule for straps is that I can see at least the first knuckle of my toes through the straps when they're nice and tight. They want to be tight enough that they're not going to fall off, but not too tight that you can't kick the board out if you need to. Now this is vital, especially when we're first starting out. The ability to kick the board out is so important. Why? Because when you start jumping, again, as I've said, the biggest thing you'll fluff, going up is easy. Coming down is much more difficult, and to come down gracefully is much more difficult. And the first few times you jump, I guarantee you, you will drop like a stone. Now if you do that with the board on your feet and you land square, that can cause all sorts of problems, knees, ankles, hips, things like this. You need to be able to kick the board off and just land like a pencil, or land on your arse, or however you want to land, is really, really important at this stage. So make sure you can kick those straps off. Okay, and the final thing we want to talk about is the fins. I would recommend for your first board, you want fins that are about 5 centimeters. This is the de facto for what we're talking about, and it's a nice comfortable fin. It's not too big, it's not too small, it gives you plenty of grip, gives you plenty of upwind ability. So what are you looking for in your first board? Again, we go back to this keyword that we talked about with the kites, free ride. Boards break down into the same categories as kite. Freestyle, free ride, wake style, new school, race, wave. Free ride is the jack of all trades. Free ride, for the same reasons as the kite, is the thing we want to go for. It will do everything well, but it's the master of nothing. But it will get you out in all conditions. It's fairly plug and play. It's fairly standard how it will behave. And just like we said with the kite, any free ride board from the last few years from one of the major manufacturers is gonna be okay. Boards keep their value much better than kites. Also, board technology is generally much further along than kite technology. So the technology doesn't change that much over the years. It tends to be now that fashions are reoccurring. Boards are going longer, boards are going shorter, boards are going wider, boards are going thinner. But the fashion, the actual board design itself isn't changing too much. I'm not going to say it's not changing, it is, and there's new things being invented, many new materials, but it's not changing too much. So a 5-year-old board that's in fairly good nick will be all right. And how do you tell if it's in good nick? Well, has it got a great big dirty crack down the middle of it? If it hasn't, it's okay. Is it delaminating? Does it look like it's buggered? It looks like it's buggered, it quite simply is. Boards are really simple. Boards aren't like kites where there can be all kind of hidden problems. Generally, the board looks good, it doesn't break in half when you pick it up, it's going to be fine to ride. So there's a sneaky trick that we can do when buying boards to save us some money. The key factor about, well, the two key factors with boards, they cost a lot less than a kite. A kite will set you back 1,500. A good board you can pick up for around about 500 euros. So they're a third of the price in the first place. They also keep their value a lot better than kites. So after 2 years, you might be able to resell your 500 euro board for 350 euros, 300 euros, which is a lot better than your kite, which has lost a third of its value, or 2/3 of its value before you even step out the door. So, what a lot of people are doing, rather than buying 3 kites, let's see the norm that what people used to do, or what I used to see people in Tenerife doing, was you'd say, okay, right, I've got one board, I've got my 135 twin tip board, I'm going to buy a 6 metre, a 9 metre and a 12 metre kite, and that will get me out in any winds from 10 knots to 35 knots. Perfect, that's great for Tenerife, awesome. But I've bought 3 kites and 1 board. What a lot of people are now doing is saying, well, hang on a minute, what I'm going to do is instead I'm going to buy a 7 metre and an 11-metre kite. So only 2 kites, but I'm going to buy a twin tip board, which is maybe a little bit smaller than I would have gone if I'd just gone one board. So maybe rather than my 135, I'm going to buy a 134, 133, something like this. But I'm going to buy either a directional, i.e. a surfboard with an awful lot of volume, or I'm going to buy a light wind board, i.e. a big door-like board, like the one that we saw in the lecture on board theory. Why? Because the boards cost a lot less, and they keep the value better, and they're much harder to damage than a kite, to be fair. So what I'm doing is I'm getting out in the same wind range. Why? Because on a really, really light wind day, I can take my 11-metre kite with my light wind board or my surfboard that's got loads of buoyancy, and I can still ride. But on a really strong day, I can take my 7-metre kite and my slightly smaller twin tip, which holds down a lot more power, and I can still ride on that day. And anything in between, I can mix and match. So A, I'm giving myself 2 styles of riding, like light wind or surfboard, but I'm also cutting down my costs massively because I'm not having to buy that 3rd kite, which is another €1,500, which is going to lose its value very, very quickly and maybe not be worth anything after 3 years anyway, whereas the board still will be. The other great thing about this is it means that for your first board, you can buy that light wind board, that huge blue door-like board that we talked about in the board theory lessons, which is awesome. Why? Because as we said in that lesson, that board's much more forgiving, it goes upwind much more easily, it's much more user-friendly for a beginner. And it means then that you don't have to sell it after 6 months once you grow out of it, you keep it as your light wind alternative, and you just buy a smaller board. So then you're investing in your kit for a long time, because the problem was it used to be, the theory used to be, when you buy your first board, it wants to be a nice big board, but you'll need to sell it after 6 months to buy something a bit more dynamic. Well, this way you don't. This way you buy a light wind board to start with, you keep hold of it as your light wind board stroke beginner board, but it's not your beginner board, it's just your light wind board, and then you buy a smaller board to keep your costs down, but to give you as many options as you had in the first place with 3 kites and 1 board. So that's a really, really nice money saving tip for your board. So again, just to summarise here, what you're looking for, the key things you want to look for: size, get a board that's the right size for you, get a free ride board. Okay, or if you're going to go down the route we've just talked about, a light wind board. A lot of manufacturers, these have come on huge in the last few years, they're really, really good and they really are worth the investment. That's the route I would suggest. You've got to make your own mind. There might be all sorts of reasons not to do that for you, but that's what I would do if I was starting out. Again, I'd buy a light wind board, 2 kites, and then as I get better, I would upgrade to buying a smaller board and have that options there open for me for the future. Okay, but also make my entry into the sport nice and easy, because that's the time when you're vulnerable to taking hits in the confidence. Whereas if you've got a nice light wind board, which makes your life really easy to start with, really forgiving, plows through the wind, plows through the lulls, and gets you riding nice and easy, it makes your life a hell of a lot easier. It really, really does. So that would be my advice on that one. Obviously, make up your own decision, make up your own mind. Any questions on this, bang them in the comments and we'll get back to you. What I would say to start with, the board isn't as important a decision as the kite. To start with, pretty much any old board will do. The board becomes much more important as you get better and better and better and better and better. So the kite is the first thing, the important thing to start with. As you learn how to control the power from the kite, you need a good kite that you can control. The board isn't so important, you can pretty much ride on a tea tray with fins. As you get better, the board gets more important as you start using the board to control the kite itself, which is a talk for another day. Okay, hope that helps. We'll see you in the next video.